Hello, everyone. Well, my name is Andrew Kim, and welcome to the seventh unit of AP Bio Review session. Now, Unit 7 is You Are a Monkey, or in other words, evolution. So now let's move on to the very first part of Unit 7, or evolution unit. Now, the first thing you have to know is natural selection. Now, what is natural selection? I'm pretty sure we all know what natural selection is by now. Well, natural selection basically is, oftentimes my mom said, Andrew, well, I'm even writing this. Andrew, go outside and play basketball. If you want to grow, if you want to be taller, you got to play basketball. Look at all the basketball players. Look at LeBron James. He's so tall. Why? Because he's been playing basketball for so long. That is absolutely wrong, right? It's not that people who play basketball grow more because they jump and do all the exercise, but it's that the taller people survive and actually become a professional basketball player because they have an advantage in the game, right? So that is all about natural selection. Long time ago, people thought, oh, evolution happens because we want to be better, right? For example, we grow as generations pass, we grow taller, we gain this or that trait because we desire for that trait. But that is not true. We desire for or we practice for that trait. But that is absolutely not true, right? How natural selection, how evolution works is basically initially we have all sorts of people. People with two arms, people with one arm, people with no arm. Now, as they survive, of course, people will with two arms will have relative advantage compared to the other two people. Why? Because when you have two arms, I mean, you can just do a lot of stuff, right, with two arms. So, of course, as generations pass, more of type A, let's call this type A, type B, type C people, as generations pass, more of type A people will survive, and ultimately, the population will be full of type A people and only one or two of type B and type C people, right? So this is all about natural selection. It's not that people originally start from type C and they feel the need of arms, so they do more arm movements and they gradually grow arms from their body. That is not true. That just cannot happen, right? That is like X-Men, that is like Marvel movie, right? Of course, that's not the case. The case is there are all different sorts of people, people with two arms, one arm, no arm, but eventually people with two arms have the most advantage, so they are the ones who survive and compromise the majority of the composed majority of the population, right? That is how natural selection basically works. Now, this trait that is beneficial for two things, survival and reproduction is called adaptation, okay? So this trait that is beneficial will obviously remain in the population and gradually compose majority of the population. And thus, as time goes on, the population will adapt, they will gain this trait, right? This process and this trait that the population will gradually gain is called adaptation. Okay, so that's one term that you would have to know, adaptation. Now, there's also something called genetic drift. What is genetic drift? I mean, as you can pretty much tell from the word itself, genetic, right, or DNA or inherited traits will drift. It will gradually change. So, I mean, obviously, all evolution is sort of genetic drift, right? Because our genetics are gradually changing. Our genetics that coded for no arms gradually change for our genetics that code for two arms, right? So we're having that drift. Now, how does genetic drift happen? As I mentioned, natural selection or bottleneck, right? So bottleneck theory effect is one way of genetic drift happening, and bottleneck effect is what I just explained, right? Um, if there are all sorts of different people existing in a population, of course, there are going to be people with certain traits that are beneficial for their survival and reproduction, which ends up people with that trait surviving more and reproducing more and enlarging the proportion in that population and ultimately just sort of colonizing that population, right? So that is bottleneck effect. And where does the name bottleneck come from? Well, that's basically because if you think about an analogy where you have a bottle and you have a very, very narrow neck, and if you have all different types of stones, what's gonna happen is once you spill this bottle upside down, then only the smaller stones are gonna come out of the bottle and the bigger stones will be stuck. Why? Because the bottleneck is very narrow, right? So only the smaller stones, only the beneficial stones, only the stones with certain characteristics that allow them to exit the bottleneck will survive and be remaining in the population, right? This is where bottleneck effect, the name comes from. Okay, so basically what bottleneck effect is telling us is that if in a population there's all sorts of stones, all sorts of people, and only the people with more advantageous traits will survive and compose the majority of the population. They'll colonize the population. Okay, so that's bottleneck effect. But this is not the only way genetic drift happens. Second way of genetic drift happening is something called founder effect. Now, founder effect is something like this. In a population, we have people with straight hairs and people with curly hairs. But people with curly hair say, yo, you know what? I feel like people with straight hair are so not fashionable. They're just ugly. I hate their hairstyle. I think we should make our own island. So a group of curly hair people moved to a different island and they found their own world, their own nation. Then of course people in this nation, since all the founders of this nation have curly hair, all of their offsprings would also have curly hairs, right? So eventually this island will be full of only curly hair people and no straight hair people, right? This is how genetic has sort of drifted, right? Instead of having a mixture of two, now we only see one type of trait existing in this island. This is what we call a genetic drift. Of course, this would never happen, right? I mean, like, what people would really say, oh, I hate their hairstyle and just leave the population in a group? That's not going to happen. But things like this can happen. When it comes to birds, let's say in a population, there were two different types of birds, birds with small wings and birds with gigantic wings. Now, it's winter and it's so cold, it's snowing. So they all want to move to a warmer island. They want to go to Bahamas. But obviously, the birds with smaller wings cannot fly all the way to Bahamas. Only the ones with bigger wings can. So eventually, in Bahamas, there will be full of birds who have bigger wings. And eventually in Bahamas, as generations pass, only birds with bigger wings will be produced and compose the population, right? So this is another way, this is founder effect of genetic drift, okay? So when it comes to genetic drift, just remember two different effects, bottleneck effect and founder effect, okay? Now let's move on to the hard part, which is Hardy-Weinberg equation, okay? So Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Now, a lot of my friends messed up their last unit test because they couldn't really understand how Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Now, I'll make this clear. Now, Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium only is valid in a very, very ideal situation. If you guys have taken, let's say, chemistry, you guys might have learned ideal gas constants. If you guys have taken physics, every single physics questions would tell you, consider no air exists in the room. Consider this ball has no volume. Consider the floor is completely slippery and there's no friction, right? There are always those conditions that make ideal laboratory environments that cannot really exist in real life, but it's sort of a simulation of real life, right? Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium also it's only valid in a very specific lab-like ideal situation, okay? And that situation that we're talking about should satisfy 5 conditions. First, no natural selection, okay? No natural selection. There is no threats being caused from the outer environment, or there's no predators, no nothing. There's no natural selection happening, okay? It's just a very happy biome where all the animals are just, we're all good, we're all chill, nobody's gonna die, no competition, they're just all surviving, okay? Second, random mating. Now, this is similar to no natural selection, right? So no girls are gonna be like, oh, I want guys who are above 6'2". No guys would be, oh, I want girls who are, okay, this, I'm not going to say this. So there's no like, types or whatever. Animals are just mating randomly, okay? Because once we actually think about types, that can lead to natural selection, right? For example, if girls only mate with guys who are taller than 6 foot, all the guys that are below 6 foot, like me, would just go extinct, right? Then that's type of natural selection, right? So we don't want that to be happening. So there's random mating going on. And we have no mutation, okay? No mutation, because mutation, again, can lead to genetic drift. We don't want that. This is the ideal situation where all the animals are just not evolving, nothing's happening, okay? They're just in this environment, they're just surviving. No evolution happening, no genetic drift, no whatever drastic changes happening, okay? Next is no migration, right? I mean, if there's migration, then the population is, the demographics is going to change. We don't want that to be seen, okay? Last is large population. Why? Well, I mean, if we have like 2 people in the room that we're observing, like it's like 2 people is not enough for statistic relevance, right? Statistic significance, right? 2 people is too small. We need enough. We need like 500, 1,000, 2,000. In fact, even 2,000 is too small. We need like millions of, or at least couple hundred thousands of organisms, individuals to really generalize this equilibrium, right? So that's what large population. Now, let me actually tell you what Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is. Now, basically, we need to learn 3 different types of frequencies. We have phenotypic frequency. We have genotypic frequency. And lastly, we have allele frequency. Now, what is phenotypic frequency? As you can tell from the name, and if you do remember what phenotype is from my previous videos, phenotype means the observable traits that are shown, right? The outer appearance or certain traits that are actually expressed in your body. For example, your hair, whether it's curly or straight. Now, phenotypic frequency is basically, so what percent of population has curly or straight hair? This is phenotypic frequency, right? How frequent is a certain phenotype? How frequent is a certain observable trait? Genotypic frequency is, so what percent of population has AA alleles for hair? Now, as I have mentioned in my previous video, every single trait in our body are coded based on 2 alleles. One obtained from your mom, one obtained from your dad, right? And depending on the combination of 2 allele or 2 codes, your phenotype or your traits are expressed, right? For example, if you had dominant, you had straight, you received straight hair from your mom and straight hair from your dad, then you will end up having a straight hair. If you receive straight hair from your mom, you receive curly hair from your dad, then you will still end up with straight hair. Why? Because straight hair is dominant, meaning that straight hair will override that curly hair code that you receive from your dad. But if you receive curly hair code or allele from your mom and curly hair code or allele from your dad, then you will end up having curly hair because both codes that code for your hair will be curly. Now, so genotypic frequency is, so what population has, let's say, big A code that code for your hair? What percent of the population has big A small that code for your hair? What percent of the population has small a code that code for your hair? Okay, so over here, we're not just talking about literally what you see from my hair, but the code that are coding my hair, okay? So that's genotypic frequency. Finally, allele frequency is what percent of not population, but codes are A or A. Now, what does this mean, Andrew? I'm so confused. Well, in the previous units, when we were talking about Punnett square, we just assumed that the probability of you receiving A or big A are equal, right? That's why we said the probability of having big A is 25%. Because the probability of having one big A is 50%, and probably having another big A is 50%. So if you multiply 50% to 50%, or 0.5 to 0.5, you get 0.25, which is 25%, right? However, of course, this will not necessarily be the case every single time, right? That is where Punnett square shows its flaw. in some situations, small recessive allele might be more frequent, and in some situations, dominant allele might be more frequent. Let's think about this situation. If you walk around in SAS, or if you just walk around in Singapore, do you see more curly hairs or more straight hairs? You see more straight hairs, right? Why? Because Singapore is predominantly Asians, and Asians have more straight hair than curly hair, right? So if people in Singapore randomly mate according to Hardy-Weinberg condition, right? Because in the Hardy-Weinberg condition, random mating got to be happening, right? So if people in Singapore randomly mate, then the chances of their kids having straight hair, receiving straight hair code from the parents will be much more likely than receiving curly hair allele or curly hair code from their parents, right? Why? Because more parents have curly hair codes, straight hair codes than curly hair codes. So they will pass down more straight hair codes than curly hair codes to their children, right? So there's different frequency in allele. There's different frequency in each code that the parents will be passing down. Okay, so that is allele frequency. Now, I'm going to actually bring up. So now. Let's say, now let's think about a situation. Okay, now let's just continue talking about straight hair and curly hair. Okay. Now, in Singapore, let's say 70% of the alleles that every people in Singapore have is straight, and only the other 30% of alleles are curly, okay? Now, if this is the situation, what are the chances that a random baby born from a random mated parents in Singapore have straight hair allele? By the way, big A, since straight hair is dominant, I will note straight hair as big A allele and curly hair allele as small a, because curly hair is recessive, okay? What are the chances of a randomly mated parent's random child having big A, or in other words, straight hair allele? Well, an easy way to think about this is first think about what are the chances of this kid's first allele being big A. 70%, right? I literally wrote it over here. Now, what are the chances of this child's second allele also being big A? It's also 70%, right? Now, in order for two 70% chances to happen, we have to multiply 70% times 70%, which is 0.7 times 0.7, which is 0.49, which is 49%. Do you understand this? I really want you to understand this, okay? And if you can't understand, don't worry, because after I explain with curly hair and straight hair, I'll explain with an easier analogy, and I hope that will make more sense, okay? Now, then what are the chances of this randomly mated baby, randomly born baby, having small a allele? Well, first, let's break it down again. What are the chances of this kid's first allele being small a? Well, that's going to be 30%. What are the chances of this kid's second allele being A? That's also 30%. So in order for two 30% chances of events happening, both happening, you have to multiply the two, which will end up as 9%. Okay? Now, lastly, what are the chances of this kid ending up with having big A, small a allele? Now, this, in fact, is slightly more complicated because there are two different cases possible. This kid can either have big A as the first allele and small a as the second allele, or it could be the reverse case. This kid might have small allele as the first allele and big A as the second allele. Both cases will count as one big A and one small a combination, right? So we have to we have to calculate the probability of both cases and then add the probability, right? So what are the chances of this kid receiving big A as the first allele? That is 70%. What are the chances of this kid receiving small a as the second allele? 30%. Now, what are the chances of 70% events happening and then 30% events happening? Well, that is 70% times 30%, which is 0.7 times 0.3, which which is 0.21, which is 21%. Now, now let's think about the second case when the first allele is small a and the second allele is big A. What are the chances of this kid receiving small a as the first allele? 30%. What are the chances of this kid receiving big A as the second allele? 70%. Now, what are the chances of 30% events happening and the 70% probability events happening? Well, that is 30% times 70%. And that will be 0.3 times 0.7 equals to 0.21, which is 21%. If you add the two, you will end up having 42%. Now you might ask me, Andrew, what a coincidence. Both of them are 21%. You are stupid. That's not a coincidence. Obviously, you have the same probability for the two because the chances of you receiving the big A first and small a later and small a first and big A later are literally the same, right? What are the chances of you wearing no, sorry, that's a bad analogy. But over here, as you can see, we're multiplying 70% probability to 30% probability for the first case, and for the second case, we're multiplying 30% probability to 70% probability, right? We're multiplying the same number, but just in different order. So of course, the results will be the same. Okay, so essentially, the next time you do this, you just have to calculate the probability of 1 and multiply by 2. Okay, so I really want you to understand this whole process, okay? Now, of course, the probability of this kid getting 1A will be 70% and small a is 30%. So this kid receiving 2 big A's will be 70% times 70%. That's why you have 49%. What are the chances of this kid receiving small a and another small a? Well, that's going to be 130% probability event times another 30% probability event. So that's 30% times 30%, which is 9%, right? What are the chances of this kid receiving 1 big A and 1 small a? Well, that you have to think about 2 different cases, right? When the kid receives 1 big A first and then 1 small a, or 1 small a and then 1 big A. But either case will have same probability, so you just have to calculate the probability of one situation and multiply 2, right? So if you calculate the probability of the first situation, the probability of receiving 1 big A is 70%, 1 small a is 30%, so 70% times 30% is 21%, and you have to multiply 2 to that, which will give you 42%. Okay? Now, another interesting thing is if you add the 3, what do you end up with? 49% plus 9% plus 42%. If you do the math, it's going to be 100%. Oh, what a coincidence, Andrew. You add the 3 probability and you end up with 100%. You are stupid. Obviously, if you add the 3, you will end up with 100%. Why? Well, it's because these 3 are all possible scenarios, right? If you add the probability of every possible scenario of a certain event, then you will end up with 100%, right? If Real Madrid and Barcelona are playing a match, let's say the chance of Real Madrid winning is 70%, the chance of Barcelona winning is 20%, the chance of them drawing is 10%. Of course, if you add the 3 probability, you will end up with 100%. Why? Because these 3 are the only possible scenarios, right? So if you add the chances of all possible scenarios, then you will end up with 100%, right? Because there is no other possible scenario that can take up that portion of probability from 100%, correct? That is why, of course, if you add all 4 of them, or all 3 of them technically, you will end up with 100%, okay? Now, I will actually, let me see if I have time. I do not really have time, so I will, but this is still a little bit important. So I'll just, okay. Now, just in case, if there are some people who still don't understand how this works, then listen. If you have understood, then move to the part where I start explaining phylogeny, okay? This part is only for people who are kind of stupid and who could not people who could not understand my explanation of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium and need some analogy, okay? So now this analogy is, we're talking about Love Island now, okay? Love Island. Now, in this Love Island, it's a massive Love Island, okay? We have 300 guys and 700 girls. Yoo-hoo! Perfect. So now what's gonna happen is it's day 1, and this random generator will choose 2 people from this island and force them to be a couple. Brutal, right? But that's how it works. And what's even more brutal is this random generator is so stupid that it does not know that it has to choose 1 guy and 1 girl. it will just choose two random people from the island, meaning that it could possibly choose two guys or it could possibly choose two girls, okay? Now, what are the chances of this random generator choosing a guy couple? Well, what are the chances of this generator choosing guy as the first person of the couple? Well, 30%, right? Because there are 300 guys and 700 girls. So the chance of choosing a guy is 300 over 1,000, right? Because there are 1,000 people and only 300 of them are guys. So it's 30%, right? Then what are the chances of this random generator choosing another guy for the second option? Well, that's also going to be 30%, right? So a guy couple being made, the chances are 30% times 30%, which is 9%. Now, what are the chances of this random generator choosing one girl and another girl as the couple? Whoa. Let's break this down, okay? What are the chances of this random generator choosing one girl? Well, that is 70%. Why? Because there are 1,000 people, and out of 1,700 of them are girls, so the chances of a girl being picked is 70%, right? Now, what are the chances of the second person that the generator picks is also a girl? Well, that's also 70%. Why? Again, there's 70% of them are girls, so the random generator choosing a girl will be 70%. So the final probability of this random generator choosing a girl couple is choosing 70% event and then choosing another 70% event, which you can calculate by multiplying the two, which will give you 49%, right? Now, what are the chances of this random generator actually making a heterozygous couple, a guy-girl couple? Well, there are two options, right? Option one, when the random generator chooses a girl, guy, and then chooses a girl. Option two, when the random generator chooses a girl and then a guy. What are the chances of first event choosing a guy and then choosing a girl happening? Well, again, let's break it down. What are the chances of this random generator choosing guy as the first person? Well, 30%. What are the chances of the random generator choosing girl as the second option? Well, 70%. If we multiply the two, we get 21%. Now, what are the chances? Now, what about second option? What are the chances of this random generator choosing a girl and then a guy? Well, again, let's break it down. What are the chances of this random generator choosing girl as the first option? Well, 70%. What are the chances of this random generator choosing guy as the second option? Well, 30%. So if you multiply the two again, we get 21%. And as I told you, these two numbers are the same. Why? Because choosing a guy first and then a girl first has equal probability as choosing a girl first and then a guy, right? Because it's literally the same event, but in reverse order. We're multiplying the same numbers, but just in reverse order. So they're going to be the same probability. If we add the two, 42% of the times, this random generator will make a heterozygous couple, right? As you can see, these two are literally the same, okay? They're literally the same. In this situation, allele frequency would be sex frequency, right? How frequent are guys? How frequent are girls? Genotypic frequency would be, so what are the girl guy combination? How frequent are guy girl couples? How frequent are girl girl couples? How frequent are guy guy couples, right? And finally, phenotypic frequency would be something like, so is this couple a gay couple, a lesbian couple, a heterozygous couple? What type of a couple it is, right? It's the observable traits, right? So I really want you guys to not be stressed about Hardy-Weinberg equation, because at the end of the day, it's simply that you're receiving two alleles, two codes, and depending on the frequency of the code that you're receiving, the probability of you receiving a certain combination of two codes will change. That is the essence of this whole topic, okay? Just remember that and multiply. Now, I know that teachers will teach p squared plus 2pq plus q squared. Don't even think about it. Just think about Love Island, gay couple, lesbian couple, heterozygous couple, and what the sex frequencies are. How frequent are guys? How frequent are girls? That's it, okay? Once you know that, it's gonna come easy, okay? All right, let's move on now. The last thing you have to know about this topic is phylogeny, and phylogeny is very simple. It's really simple. So we all start from, let's say, Andrews, okay? We had 100 Andrews. Now, after a couple of generations, okay, the number actually doesn't matter. There's a population of Andrews, and we all just survive. But then one day, there's a mutated Andrew. And this Andrew has 3 arms. So that's going to be a new branch, new group of Andrews, right? Whenever a new group emerges from a population through mutation, through genetic drift, through whatever, we draw this branch to show how this population is now splitting into 2 parts, okay? So this is 3-armed Andrew, okay? And this is just normal Andrew. Now, as time goes on, among these 3-armed Andrews, now there are 3-eyed Andrews emerging, okay? So these Andrews would have 3-armed and also 3-eyed, okay? Woo, weird. But then as and these populations find their own land world to live, okay? Normal Andrews are just living in where they used to live. And then so basically now we again have 3-armed Andrew and they're continuing to survive. But then one day now we have a 3-legged Andrew, which already kind of no, I'm just joking. 3-legged Andrew. Now 3-legged and 3-armed Andrew has emerged. A new population. Okay. But then in this new world, in this new island where 3-armed and 3-eyed Andrews exist, a new branch from this population is made. And now this population has 3-armed, 3-eyed, and they have 3-headed Andrew. So 3-headed, 3-armed, and 3-eyed Andrew is made in this population. So now how many different branches of Andrews do we have? We have 1 Andrew, which is normal Andrew. We have 2 Andrew, which is 3-armed Andrew. We have 3 Andrews, which is 3-legged and 3-armed Andrew. And we have 4th Andrew, which is 3-armed and 3-eyed Andrew. And finally, we have 5th Andrew, which is 3-armed, 3-headed, and 3-eyed Andrew, right? So we have different populations. And by drawing this branch, we're really showing how the animals, how the groups, how the species sort of split, and new species are emerging from previous species based on genetic drift, natural selection, whatever reasons. Okay, that is pretty much it about phylogeny. So the thing is, obviously, if you are closer in the branch, that means you guys share more similar traits, right? I mean, compared to this Andrew and this Andrew versus this Andrew and this Andrew, of course, the red pairs would be more similar, right? The only difference between the 2 red pairs of Andrews is that one has 3-headed, and that's the only difference, right? Versus if you compare these 2 green Andrew groups, then the difference is that one group has 3 heads, 3 arms, and three eyes, right? So they have more differences, right? So that's pretty much it that you would have to know about phylogeny, okay? So yeah. And of course, there will be some FRQ questions, but honestly, if you just try solving them and if you have a look at the answer sheet, I think it's gonna come natural. So I won't really suggest you to put too much time on this, okay? So that is pretty much it for this unit. Now there's only 1 unit left, so congratulations, guys. You have almost made it. Please let's make it through the last unit and let's hopefully all end up with a score that we have been dreaming for the past 1 year. Okay, thank you so much for watching this video, and most importantly, don't forget to have a great day.